So the Democratic debates happened, and in the aftermath, we were particularly underwhelmed. But then there were the impeachment hearings, and polls indicate people are less and less interested in seeing the president impeached.
So is there wholesale apathy on the impeachment question? Are people campaign fatigued, or do most just have different priorities than both of these top Washington stories? Joining us via Skype to talk about all of that is Aaron Maté, host of Pushback with Aaron Maté and a frequent contributor to The Nation. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
all right, so
Aaron.
Democrats are very excited about what went down with impeachment this week. In fact, they're so excited that they want to go back to the Mueller inquiry and call some impeachment witnesses and try to dig into that again as well. Aaron, what did you make of these this week's proceedings?
Well, it's interesting. I heard a lot of comparisons to Watergate, the supposed John Dean moment for Gordon Sondland, who was Trump's ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. I think a more comparative presidential scandal is Russiagate, the predecessor to Ukrainegate, but not for positive reasons. I saw a lot of supposed bombshells that actually weren't that, a lot of claims based on hearsay and qualified claims. And again, an emboldenment, as we talked about last time, of really hawkish Cold War mindset. But I think it's worth talking about Sondland's testimony just for a second, because it was deemed to be the most important one. He did say in his opening statement that there was a quid pro quo, and that got a lot of excitement. But I think what a lot of people missed is that he was not talking about the issue at the heart of the impeachment inquiry, which is whether or not Trump leveraged military assistance, money for weapons, to compel investigations. But he was talking about leveraging White House meetings, that basically he said that Rudy Giuliani said to U.S. officials and to Ukrainians that if Ukraine wanted a meeting and a phone call with Trump, then they would have to commit to investigations. But that's not the issue at the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is whether or not Trump leveraged the military assistance. And on that front, Sondland, I think, actually undermined the Democrats' case, because he made clear, although he was an official, a U.S. official, to communicate that there was a linkage to military assistance, he said very clearly and over that it was his own presumption. He wasn't told by Trump or anyone that there was a linkage. He just presumed it in the absence of a credible explanation for why the military freeze had been made. So his presumption might be right. And if I had to bet, actually, I'd say that it is. But a presumption does not make for a plausible presumption does not make for evidence for a convincing case. And I think it's one of the many reasons why I've had a problem with putting so much energy into this thing.
Yeah, I noticed the exact same thing, Aaron, and you're right. That is going to be at the heart of the trial. Whenever a trial actually comes to bear in the Senate, you can expect to hear exactly that parsing of the language. And yesterday, Aaron, Will Hurd, who is somebody who has nothing to lose. We were talking about this earlier. He's somebody who very much has gone against the GOP. He comes out and he goes, you know what? I think this was bad, and I don't think it rises to the level of bribery or for a conviction on the vote of impeachment. I mean, that is what the ultimate GOP case is likely going to be, right? After a 6 to 8 week Senate trial.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to agree with Will Hurd, because he's not someone I find myself agreeing with often. But listen, that was my initial position as well. When I first heard about all this, I thought, you know what, it's not appropriate at all. And in fact, it is an abuse of office for Trump to try to pressure a foreign leader to investigate Joe Biden. What he did in that phone call with Zelensky, I think, was inappropriate. And I think it was worthy of congressional censure. But the question is, do you have enough there to build a strong impeachment case? And, basing it off someone's presumption does not make for, I think, a strong case. And is it then worth the attendant consequences, this all-consuming process that, as you say, is going to drag out? And now there was a report recently in the Washington Post about how Republicans, sensing the opportunity, are going to drag out this trial for as long as possible. And one consequence of that would be to keep 6 Democratic candidates, including the 2 progressive leaders, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, off of the campaign trail right up until the eve of the Iowa caucuses. So, these are other consequences that we have to consider here. And I can't think of, it's a gift to people like Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg. But for progressives who want to see Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren win, I don't see how we can look at that and not be sensing some alarm.
Yeah.
Well, and Nancy Pelosi has made no secret of her contempt for the politics of both Warren and certainly Sanders. Do you think there's any intentionality around that?
I wouldn't, I mean, who knows what goes on behind the scenes, but overall, I do think that part of the reason why we have Russiagate and Ukrainegate is a real hostility to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, what was the obvious lesson from 2016? You had Trump, fooling enough people, I think, into believing that he was a working class champion, that he was going to drain the swamp. That was an obvious con. Instead of responding with policies that could sway the voters who believed in Trump and believed that he was going to bring their jobs back, Democrats responded by doubling down on a crazy conspiracy theory and blaming their loss on Russia, blaming their loss on Jim Comey and whatever else, and not doing self-reflection for obvious reasons, because, coming up with policies that would actually challenge the system that Trump ran against would mean questioning Democrats' own privilege within that system. So that was a no-go. So instead, I think what we have is a prolonged effort on the part of the Democratic leadership to resist being an actual resistance.
I think that's so well said, and something that I've been thinking about too, because they've never been able, the obvious lesson to learn from this election is centrist, corporatist candidate like Hillary Clinton is a non-starter, that this is not who we should be running. But they don't want to learn that lesson. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to think about that. So instead, it's got to be Comey. It's got to be the media covered Trump too much. It's got to be the voters are racist and stupid. It's got to be Russia. Anything to avoid coming to that most obvious conclusion that Trump ran on issues like trade. He was to the left of Hillary on healthcare, that he spoke more, even though I agree with you that it was all a con, but he spoke more to those issues and resonated more with the American public, and that's why he won. If that's the conclusion you come to, then the way that you contrast with Trump, the criticisms that you level at him, and the type of politics that you pursue in the future is very different. But people like Nancy Pelosi, who have very much benefited from this model of the Democratic Party, they don't want to hear that. They don't want to think about that. They don't want to change what they're doing.
I totally agree. And, part of Trump's con also was posing, I think, as being anti-military intervention. He called out Hillary Clinton's legacy when it comes to the Syria proxy war or Libya, and he painted himself as being anti-intervention. And, there were studies showing that in communities with the highest rate of military sacrifice, that Trump's message caught on and that those districts went to Trump, thinking that he was going to roll back the, hawkish mentality that politicians like Hillary Clinton and many others have enrolled the country in. Well, of course, he hasn't done that. He's increased U.S. military action abroad. But Democrats, as a part of Russiagate and now Ukrainegate, have gone the opposite direction, have gone the same direction they had before of embracing a hawkish posture towards Russia. And now we're supposed to be outraged that some military funding was briefly put on hold. Military funding, by the way, that Barack Obama himself, as Glenn Greenwald, as you guys spoke to Glenn Green about this week on your show, that Barack Obama didn't want to send. He resisted calls to send it. And by the way, among the people he resisted was the Democrats' first star witness, Bill Taylor, who said that not sending military assistance to Ukraine was akin to appeasement, his words. And now, just underscoring the shift to the right that Democrats are taking, now Barack Obama's position is anathema and what we're actually rallying against in this impeachment saga for the Democratic Party.
Right. It's like John McCain actually won after all. But all right. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Aaron.
Thanks,
really
Aaron.
appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Next on Rising, is America actually watching these impeachment inquiry hearings?
The numbers might surprise you. The Hills Media columnist Joe Concha is going to tell us more when Rising continues.